10 CSS selectors you need to know. Well, maybe a more accurate description would be 10 CSS selectors that you need to know of so you can look up the syntax of when you need to use them. So the first one that we'll look at here is just a basic, boring H1 selector. And real quick here, we're going to be styling this HTML page right here. And I'll kind of show you the link between HTML and CSS as we go. And then also, this is what the web page looks like for this HTML page. So a very well-styled page here, but we're going to make it even more well-styled. So going back to my CSS here, the first CSS selector we're going to discuss is just this tag selector. And it's very straightforward. You just use the label of some HTML tag, and this is going to apply whatever styles that you use here within your kind of style rule, all these properties and values, to all of the tags that match this selector. So if I look at my HTML here, I only have one H1 tag, and that is code Ryan. And in my styles, I'm setting the color to red. So if we look at my web browser output here, what you're going to see is that my H1 is now turned to red. So the first selector to know is just this general tag selector. Now the second one to know is also a very common one, and that is a class selector. So to select a class in CSS, you use the dot syntax. So when I say dot first item, it's saying that I want you to select any HTML elements that have a class name of first item. So in this example here, you can see that I have one element here that has a class name of first item. And that is this list item here with the text of item number 1. And then here I'm setting it to a font size of 20 pixels. So if I look at my browser output, you can see that my first item here with that class name, it now has a little bit bigger font size compared to the other list items. So that is the class selector in CSS. Now the next selector I want to hit on is selecting items within other items. So you're basically using tag selectors, but selecting nested elements. So here what I'm saying is, okay, get all of the OL tags, but then I want you to select all of the LI tags that are within an OL tag. All right, so this is selecting all LIs that are nested within an OL. So just separating things by a space here will select nested HTML elements. So if I look at my HTML here, I have this OL here. So I'm telling my CSS to select all of these LIs that are nested within this OL. But I'm telling it not to select this LI that is outside of this ordered list. And you can imagine that this might be useful if, say, you have an ordered list in your program and you have a unordered list and you just want to style the ordered list. You could just use a nested tag selector like so. If I go back to my web browser here, you're going to see that now all of my list items here are indeed blue because that is the style I applied here to these nested list items. Now, next up, we will talk about using the of type and as well the child selector. We'll kind of wrap into here. So right here, I'm still using a nested selector. So I'm saying within my ordered list, I want to select an LI, but I only want to select the last LI. So I'm using :last of type. And that's saying select the last list item that is within my ordered list here. So it should just select this final list item because that is the last of type of list items here. And I'm setting the color to orange. So if I go back here, you see that this list item, it is set to orange. All right, so that is the last of type. Now you can also use the kind of last child selector as well in this case. So I'll use last child, and this will style the LI within this ordered list that is the last child. So this, in this case, it's going to be the same as last of type here. So if I go back to my browser, you see that nothing changes. But if I change this in my CSS and I instead go first child, you can see that now it sets the first list item to orange. And then with that, there's also the nth type selector and nth child selector, in which you can select the nth element within the list. So you can use all of these to really pinpoint what you want to select here. All right, but we'll just keep it that last of type. Now, kind of combining selectors we used earlier, you can select an element that has a certain class. So sometimes it's useful to say that, hey, I want to select all my p tags with a paragraph class. So here, that's exactly what I'm doing. p.paragraph is saying select all of my p tags with a paragraph class. And if I look at my HTML here, you're going to see that I do indeed have two p tags. One I have right here with an ID of description saying this is description. And then I have another p tags with a class of paragraph saying this is my paragraph. So when I look at my browser output here, what you're going to see is that my first p tag, it goes unstyled, but I do set my p tag with that specific class to this is my paragraph, because this selector will select the element with whatever class it has. All right. So p.paragraph is paragraph with the paragraph class. Now you can also use ID selectors. And the way that you use an ID selector is using a hashtag or a pound symbol. So hashtag description is saying select all elements with a description ID. Now, technically speaking, this should just be one element because IDs should be unique to a single element within your HTML. So here, this will select an HTML element with a description ID. And it should set it to text decoration line through. So it should put a line through my description. And as you can see, it does indeed do just that. So that is how you can select different IDs within your CSS. Now you can also group selectors. So right here, I'm using my element selectors, but I'm grouping them together. So this is saying I want to select all H1s and all P tags. So a comma in CSS is kind of like using an and statement. So H1 and select this P tag, and you could kind of keep going with this. So all list items as well. So this is saying select all of my H1s and all of my paragraphs and all of my list items and set the font style to italic. And if we go back to my web browser, you're going to see all of my list items, my H1, and my paragraph tags are now all italic. And the next selector I want to show you is the pseudo selectors. So pseudo selectors allow you to select a certain state of an element. So what do I mean by certain state? Well, this will mean that if you are actively hovering over an element, if an element is being focused, if an element is being visited or has been visited. And in this case, I'm selecting all of my buttons that are being hovered. And I'm setting a background color to orange red. So use this pseudo selector by using a colon, just like I did kind of before here with my last of type selectors. But I use a colon and then I specify whatever state I want to select. So here I'm setting my buttons when they're hovered, set the background color to orange red. And if I look at this for my button here, if I hover over it, the background color turns to orange red. Now, just to show you some other selectors that you can use here, you can see that I have active, or if something has been linked, or if something has been focused or focus visible, and there's a ton of different kind of state selectors that you can do as well. All right, but you can use a colon and select a certain state of an element. Now, next up, I'll show you an attribute selector. So for an attribute selector, you use the square bracket syntax, and then you state whatever attribute it is, and then whatever value that attribute has. So this is saying I want to select all of my inputs that have an attribute, using these square brackets here, of type equal text. And I'm setting a very large, beautiful border on these elements. So select all of my inputs that are type text and give them this border. And if I look at my HTML here, I have several different inputs here, but I only have one input that is of type text right here, and it's my name input. So if I go back to my browser here, I should only see that I've selected this input with the attribute here. This is an HTML attribute of type text. And if I go back here, you can see that my name input now has this very beautifully styled blue border around it. All right, so that is how you can use an attribute selector, and this could be any HTML attribute. This will allow you to select it. And the final and potentially most fun selector that I have here is selecting a pseudo element. So I actually recently used this within my professional application, and there was actually a really good use case for doing this. So what I needed to do in my application was I was using this external library, and this API didn't expose a way to like add a tooltip to some element. So I was actually able to do this using a CSS pseudo element. And this will allow you to add content using CSS, which is really cool. And there's other cool things that you can do with these pseudo elements as well. So here, the way that this works is you can use a colon or a double colon and either before or after. And that allows you to add some content either before or after a certain element within your HTML. So here, what I'm saying is that I want to select my input that has the attribute of type equals radio. So get all of my radio buttons, but then after those radio buttons, so this is my pseudo element selector here, I want to add the content of select one, and then I set some different positioning to it and some different colors and stuff like that. But the main thing to know here is that I can add content here with this after selector. All right. So this should go in and it should select all of my inputs here with type radio, which are these two inputs here. And then it should add some content before both of them. And if I look at the browser output here, what you're going to see is that right next to these radio buttons here, I actually add some content of select one. This isn't the most like beautifully styled thing, but as you can see, like this could be a way that you could add like a little tooltip or a little description to some HTML elements, or there's a ton of different cool things that you can do with this. But here you can see I literally add some content to these elements just using CSS, which is pretty dang cool. And you could also use a before selector as well and different things like that. But this is a way to add kind of pseudo elements to your page with just CSS. So those are 10 CSS selectors to know of. If you're interested in a more deep dive on how selectors work, check out this video on the screen here. But if not, I have future CSS tutorials coming here soon. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in that next one.